I'd like to welcome everyone to the Breakfast Club of New Jersey this morning and introduce us all to Frank Kovacs, who is our organization's founder and leader. So good morning, Frank.
Good morning. Welcome to the Breakfast Club, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces, so I'm not going to go too deep into an introduction today. The Breakfast Club, as everybody knows, was founded after the 9/11 tragedy, and we've been running all of that time due to, unfortunately, the economic and financial issues in the country, as well as the changes to the employment landscape due to digital. One thing that I would suggest everybody look at right now is what's going on with a issue called BRICS, BRICS, and that is a combination of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South America, and most recently it looks like Mexico is joining. And they're trying to create their own currency and actually make that the new standard in the world, which would have tremendous effect on the current world order. So I don't see a lot of it being discussed in the news stations right now. They seem preoccupied with a lot of other stories, but that one in particular has the ability to have a tremendous amount of impact on both the economy and ultimately the job landscape. So definitely something worth looking into and apprising yourself on the issue so you can speak intelligently on it. Um, George has been putting out a lot of stuff on ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a revolutionary new technology. There's ChatGPT 3 and most recently ChatGPT 4. I would definitely suggest, if you haven't already, open up. There's free trial accounts, so you could go out there and at least get exposed to the technology. There's a lot of stuff posted just on LinkedIn itself. User guides, how to do prompts more effectively. There's a lot of different companies and offerings above and beyond OpenAI and Google, which does Bard as the two primary offerings that had come out. Most of those are very niche oriented to different focuses. But because this technology has a lot of potential impact, it's in its infancy right now. But as time goes on, definitely good to at least experience it firsthand and understand it a little in its place in AI overall. So I don't think doom is imminent, but it's good to understand these technologies, how they work, which way they're going in case different questions on them might arise if you're going into a interview situation. Above and beyond that, glad to see, our premise that we've been founded on has been a lot of our alumni return to help others, and many of them are here today. So if by chance you're new to the Breakfast Club, feel free to post in chat, a little bit about yourself, job you're seeking, companies you're targeting. A lot of people here would be glad to help you. So with that, I'm going to turn over the mic to Gerry. Gerry and David form our presentation committee, and they'll introduce the speaker and what we have on tap for today. If you have any ideas for people that you've seen in other networking groups or venues and thought they'd be a good match, just let Gerry and David know, and I'm sure they'd be glad to consider the individual. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank. Good morning, everyone. I have a great speaker for you today. Let me introduce him. Gerry Crispin describes himself as a lifelong student. He stays grounded by engaging a community of friends and colleagues every day, actively promoting the notion of that talent management is the point of the spear of HR. Every stakeholder in the hiring process, especially candidates, must have their basic needs addressed. Gerry founded Cross X Roads in 1996 to encourage a transformation of hiring into the 21st century. Gerry co-authored 8 books on the evolution of staffing and has written hundreds of articles and white papers on similar topics. I'd now like to introduce Gerry.
Well, thank you for having me. I also see an awful lot of people who look awfully familiar. So I have a feeling I've seen you at some point in one of these other groups. And you keep asking me back, which drives me nuts, but I love it. Anyway, so thank you. Couple things. One, for those of you who don't know me, I should tell you a couple things about me so you get a sense of where I'm at. I have obviously been working in recruiting for 50 some odd years. Nobody would recommend on your resume that you should put down that you've been in something for 50 some odd years. I have a feeling ageism would be one of the key areas that you'd have to be facing into. But I haven't really worked in a large company for almost 30 years at this point. I started Career Crossroads in the 90s when I thought the world would change inside of 6 months. It didn't. But it continues to evolve, and I think we have a responsibility to kind of embrace and be part of it. I still work. I celebrated my 75th birthday at Burning Man. If you don't know what Burning Man is, then you're going to have to look it up. But in any case, I still travel almost 100,000 miles a year. And continue to love doing that and speak in different countries. I am taking in 2 weeks, I will be taking a delegation of 15 heads of HR and talent acquisition to Israel to study how they incentivize work and how they recruit. And I've done that now in Brazil, India, China, Hungary, Czech Republic, Cuba, Singapore, South Africa, Japan, and this year Israel. And I don't know how many more years I'm going to do that, but for me, it's how I manage my own development by stepping outside the box of the United States. I see things about how we treat one another differently, and it's a constant learning, and it wakes me up in a variety of different ways. The only other thing I'd mention right now is we just published this week a 50-page document called The History of Recruiting, which is scaring a bunch of recruiters out there because they didn't realize that we had a body of knowledge of how we've screwed up recruiting for probably thousands of years, but I chose to work from the Second Industrial Revolution, so it's really covering 1900 to today. And in a few minutes, I'll put the link to that if somebody really wants to look at that. But obviously, where I'm coming from has to do with how recruiters recruit as opposed to how job seekers seek jobs. Although there's a few things that is the intersection of that. And that's why my company is called Career Crossroads. It was designed as the intersection of what employers and job seekers are doing. So that's really where I'm coming from. I probably should start with Alex's comment because I should probably reprise some of what I said just before we started this. So Alex, when did you say I first started talking about that? It was like 2007 or something? No, you're going to have to unmute yourself. Nope, you still
You
have to
said
unmute.
2009.
2009. I pushed the wrong icon. Speaks about my age.
And what was the question you said?
Well, essentially, in that meeting, I remember you said that 14 times you have a chance to increase your chances of getting an interview if someone refers you to the company. And then you fine-tuned it and you said it has to be an internal referral and not an outside referral.
Yeah, and let me let me briefly indicate why, and it's still true. When you apply today, I would say in the United States, close to 98% of the companies have some form of referral program. In many cases, it may be a bad program. It may be one in which there's no incentive or communication with the employees. But many companies rely heavily on increasing referral capabilities and make a strong effort to include within that referral capability the ability to hire a diverse group of people, because those are issues that they would have to face into. If when that happens, the data that you've supplied, whether it's a resume or an application or what have you online, the recruiters who are involved, if the company is large enough to have recruiters, will be able to see a tag on your resume or on a line about your resume that you were referred by somebody internally. And they are almost, it's almost part of the DNA that they would open those tags first. They would take a look at whether or not you're qualified, and if not, they would, basically tell you we're not going forward, hopefully anyway. But what happens if on average 100 people apply for a job? The data suggests that only 4 of them have an internal referral. And that means that if half of the people are qualified, 2 of them are qualified. And I can assure you that the data would suggest, continuing to today, in companies large enough to have programs and ATSs, that if 100 people apply and 4 people are referred, those 2 people will be drawn from those 4 and be on the final slate of 5 individuals who are interviewed. They will get up to bat. And that means that if you're in that pool and not referred by an internal person, you're among 48 other qualified candidates who, by and large, 2 or 3 people would be drawn on for that slate. And when you do the calculation, the difference in terms of your probabilities to get up to bat is 14 times. So the issue is, if you apply for a company, can you find someone that you have some affinity with using LinkedIn or whatever other tools you have to identify someone who you once worked with, you worked in the same company, or went to school with, or were part of the same professional association, or lived in the same freaking town? I don't care. Any element of affinity works, because when you engage somebody and say, hey, here's my name, we haven't really met, but we went to school a few years apart, and I see that you're working for this company that I'm targeting. I'd like to pick your brain for a couple minutes because I'm thinking of applying for X job. And that person generally is going to say yes. I would tell you is probably going to say yes 8 out of 10 times. And then when you're engaging them, you thank them and say, oh, and what kind of referral program do you have in your company? I'd love it if I could indicate on the application, if it's so determined, that you are my referral. Or do you have to do something in order to put my name in as my referral? And I got to tell you, it's 14 times more likely that you're going to get up to bat and hired. I believe, and I've argued with coaches for years, that fundamentally many things are important, but this is the most important thing you can do to change the game. or to game the system, if you will. So that's basically it, Alex. Thanks for asking the question again. I just think it's important, and I don't think we give enough attention to how you network internally to a company to ensure that you find someone, because we can almost always find someone who we have some degree of affinity with. Anyhow, that's about it. So I would love to be able to engage you in a little bit of a conversation about issues that I think are important, but I'm happy to engage you about any issue you think is important. Three of the things that I think are changing the game for recruiters right now. One is candidate experience. I think there is a trend for major corporations, especially, to realize that their employer brand is in part dependent on how they treat not only employees, but recruiters, but candidates as well. And so I want to spend a little bit of time on that. A second issue is obviously AI. And you mentioned it right in the beginning, Frank. George had mentioned it earlier in relation to that. I'd like to spend a little time on that because while it's going to continue to change, I will tell you that most recruiters are using it today, right now, and there's no reason why you can't use it as well. And the third is pay. How we treat pay is keeping recruiting leaders up at night in a very significant way. And there is a train coming at us from Europe that's about to publish a new pay transparency directive. And I think that's going to be a game changer again in terms of how you are treated in the process of looking at a job in terms of a variety of things. So those are the three things that I think are important for me in terms of what I see happening with recruiters. And so I'll start with the AI because I think it was mentioned a couple times. So I would maintain today that every recruiter is experimenting with ChatGPT or one of the others. And I think ChatGPT, from an academic presentation that I saw last week, maintains a little bit of an edge, if you will, on some of the other AI evolutionary pieces that are coming into play. But the one thing that they are all doing, and it's automatic, is they're getting their job descriptions that are posted written by ChatGPT. And so I would suspect that even at this moment, if you were to look at a range of job descriptions on Indeed, at least 50 to 75% of them were not written by humans. They were written by ChatGPT, and hopefully they were reviewed by a human who could have maybe changed a couple of the things that maybe ChatGPT decided to invent as important. George, are you? I see a little bit out of there. You are. I have a very strong opinion that everyone, I believe that everyone on this session, if you will, probably has read something about ChatGPT, but I would also suspect that a number of you have not actually gone to ChatGPT and experimented and played with it, devoted at least an hour's worth of time to do that. And I think it's essential. I think you should be doing that. I don't think any of you should, put it off. And one of the things that I would do is I would feed a job description and I would basically look at a job description that you might have applied to most recently, and I would pick 10 bullets or a few bullets off of that job description, and I would feed it to ChatGPT and say to ChatGPT, do you understand this is a job description? And ChatGPT will come back to you and say, yes, I understand. It's a job description. Here's kind of what it would be looking like. So it would give you some feedback. And then I would say to ChatGPT, here are several bullets from my resume. Do you understand? And ChatGPT will respond to you and say something to the effect of, oh yeah, I get it. And so this is part of a resume of yours for applying to jobs, something to that effect. And then I would say to ChatGPT, please rewrite my resume to best align to the bullets that I gave you for the job description. And then take a look at the result.
Yeah, Gerry, one thing I would add to that,
basically what I'm saying is that if recruiters can use it to refine their job description, you can use it to align yourself better to their job description. Anyhow, go George, what were you saying?
I put something in the chat. I do a Sunday, I've been doing this for about 3 years now, Gerry. I do a Sunday kind of webinar from 9 to 9:30. And this, I've gone completely ChatGPT. This is going to be for the foreseeable future. One of the things that I've seen, I put into the comment, there's a link that I came across, and basically I share my weekly reading. One of the ones, to your point, this gentleman did a fantastic job of actually decomposing how you communicate with ChatGPT, and it's like 7 steps. So if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend you just read through that and use that as a starting point. And
Excellent.
Then there's a presentation I'm working on April 20th, which I put very early in the chat. One of the other pieces of advice I would give you is you're going to see a load, a plethora, a vast amount of quote unquote examples. What I would tell you to do is do not try to quote unquote mimic what people are doing. I would tell you to experience what people are doing. This is a child that you are talking to. It has no memory of you. It has no knowledge of you. Your expectations might be here. We haven't hit the trough of disillusionment yet. You need to experience the environment. So to what Gerry said, right, there's things that you can do, right? There's going to be these series of examples. My suggestion is experience ChatGPT. Do not mimic ChatGPT.
Yeah, and the way I think of it is don't accept their result as a given. You're going to have to adjust and deal with that for now. But on the other hand, it continues to evolve faster than most of us have expected it would. And it's in a speedy way, it is changing the way we're thinking about how we recruit. Automation is coming in a big way. And while most of the folks on this group, if not all of you, are in a professional role, I can tell you that many of the hourly roles are being fully automated with chatbots and early equivalents, if you will, of chat GPTs. So the 15,000 McDonald's restaurants in the United States, there are no recruiters. People are hired literally within 24 to 48 hours, totally through automation and interviews with the equivalent of a chat GPT, but with a chatbot. So we're seeing some very significant shifts and changes that are going on. In Europe, some of the surveys show that candidates would prefer to be hired by a non-human because they believe the non-human is fairer. Just one way to think about it. I just find that fascinating. Anybody have other, George, obviously you're doing this on a regular basis. I would love to know if anybody else is making serious efforts to see how they can use some of the tools out there to find either jobs or people within those jobs that can be helpful from a networking point of view. Are any of you making efforts or spending time and energy around some of that? And I'll take silence as no. Have not moved in that direction yet. And I want to exhort you that you cannot let the other side move that far ahead of you. You've got to be able to spend some time looking at some of these tools because it's an uneven divide. And one of the problems that I have and I face into when I'm told by technology vendors and talent acquisition leaders in large companies that they've solved part of the problem of recruiting, I tell them they're missing half of the equation. Their effort is to find out whether or not you can do the job. Your decision ought to be, will I do the job? You want to be able to demonstrate to the employer, yes, that I can do the job, but you need to decide, will you do that job? And there's a lot of data that's missing. You do not know what kind of an asshole the hiring manager might be because he or she has been hiding that and their company is not going to disclose it. But I have to tell you, the recruiter knows. The recruiter knows how many times they've had to refill the same damn job because the hiring manager drove somebody out because he or she was not properly trained or forgot their training or was just so overwhelmed that they didn't pay attention. So I got to tell you, these are important things. And if I were those of you who are coaches, know that that's one of the key issues that you try to advise your clients on is how they can best decide that this is the job that they do want, not just that they can take any job. So just one of the
Gerry?
things that's, yeah.
So there are two questions or requests for questions. The first, Jim, if you unmute and ask questions.
Yes. Okay. I recently applied for a position on Monster, and apparently I clicked something that said, we will review your resume. But I'm wondering whether ChatGPT will be used to review my resume.
Yeah, to some degree. That basically they're already using plenty of tools, not necessarily ChatGPT, but I will tell you that in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've seen 40 companies that do use those kinds of tools claim that they are now fully integrated with ChatGPT as a means for how we would now filter from the 100 people who applied to the 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 that I'm actually going to pay attention to.
And I can't imagine there's a human being actually looking at my resume. It's
No, there hasn't been for years.
right.
But on the other hand, they had more primitive approaches to how I would filter your resume. So for example, I could say, did you graduate from any one of these schools? Right?
Right.
And so I'm exerting my bias, if you will, or maybe the hiring manager's bias, that I only want people who have graduated from certain schools or worked for certain companies or had a certain amount of experience or whatever. But today, I could input the profiles of successful people in my company and then ask the system to match the people who are looking for a job to that profile. And now it's taking into account a whole host of things that I'm hoping are indicative of someone who would be more likely to be successful, but I may also be increasing the level of bias based on the fact that maybe those profiles are not all are part of a particular group of folks, for example.
I,
Now the corporations are cognizant of this and trying to avoid it, but fundamentally these tools make it much easier to work with fewer recruiters to fill more jobs, and as a result, many of those recruiters are overwhelmed and fundamentally misuse some of those tools. But so my question, or your question is. Is there a lot of non-human reviews? And the answer is increasingly every day. Right now, it's still, I think, focused on by the recruiter, but the recruiter is still dealing with elements of bias that the company believes are critical for the success of the candidate they eventually select. And as you can imagine, some of them have to do with non-performance issues, where you went to school, or even if you went to school, right?
right.
So companies are trying to say, okay, well, we want to hire people for software development who may not have gone to college, because there's a lot of them out there who are really good at what they do. But what is the indicator that I'm going to use? Is it hack a job, hack a rank? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we use those things to filter from the large number to the smaller number, and there's inevitable bias built into that. And when you use referrals to help you get a better shot at it, you're using a set of biases too. That someone inside the company who knows you, even though they barely know you, would be more likely to surface someone who could successfully do the job. That's bullshit. But fundamentally, I'm suggesting that that's one of your efforts to work around, and it is taking advantage of a bias.
I actually had a couple of cases where I had a contact who knew the hiring manager or whatever. At least it got me into the small group of people who were actually looked at.
Right. It's the one of the critical components of any job search is to get up to bat, right? Is to get beyond, that 100 in the group, whatever that number is, to the small group that is in fact being evaluated.
I'm finding applying like throwing a resume into a big black hole, and if you don't have an in. So,
I'm not saying it's right. I'm just confirming that you can increase your ability to be seen as in simply by getting that referral piece.
Yep.
And fundamentally, it may not be the right thing to do always from a point of view of, are you the right person?
Mm-hmm.
But I think we all have a responsibility to try and do the best we can to get up to bat. Yeah. And I think a lot of people overlook that they do have connections that they really have not fully gone after. We tend to go after the people we know as opposed to the people that have an affinity with us.
Actually,
I don't want to beat a dead horse.
Oh.
You all get it. And the issue is you've got to decide for yourself whether you're making full advantage of that.
Well, I noticed on LinkedIn, if you're applying through LinkedIn, a little thing will pop up and say, so you have 3 contacts at this company, and that I didn't even know I had at that company.
Right.
So
but those are contacts that are within 1 or 2 connections.
Right. Yeah, those are,
What
so
you want
I'll
to
be,
deal with is evaluating LinkedIn by putting in that they currently work at the company that you're targeting,
right.
but in the past have worked in a company that you were working in or went to a given school. So that will identify many more contacts that you could conceivably have.
Yep. Thank you.
All
We
right,
do have 3 questions lined up, or
good.
3 hands raised. So we'll start in the order in which we've received them. Alex Freund has a question.
Yeah, Gerry, it takes 2 steps to getting a job. The first one is a technical/administrative, and you addressed that, and you indicated that eventually technology will take over. The second step is what I am concerned with. In the last several years, my coaching is exclusively helping executives better communicate their value in the interview process. Do you think this function could be eventually replaced?
The function of you being a coach.
No, the function of helping people improve their interviewing skills. This is a one-on-one helping them communicate better their value. Do you think this can be replaced?
I think that there are tools right now that are attempting, and I'm looking at my, I'm slowing down here because I'm looking at my face and it's not going in at the same level as my voice, but hopefully you can hear me all. Okay, yes? Okay, good. Then I'll ignore my slow face movements. So the answer that I would give is yes. There are already a series of interview practice tools that can focus in on elements of behavior and give you feedback around them. I still think they're pretty primitive, but if you think about the ability to take a look at your face, your tone, your approach, the words you use, etc., there is no question in my mind that there could easily be very sophisticated tools that not only evaluate the way in which you respond to a virtual interview, but that can give you the kind of feedback in real time that allows for you to adjust and significantly improve your responses to almost any question that would be connected to the individual. I will tell you
Jerry,
that in Japan, you can make a phone call to a service that will advise you on how to put your best foot forward, knowing your personality and the personality of the hiring manager. Because there's a company in Japan that has all of the test data that you've ever taken for every Japanese citizen, and fundamentally has access to that. The
Jerry,
problem, yeah,
sorry,
go on.
very sorry.
No,
I
go on.
spend a lot of time with people on their body language communication and the image they project on the screen. Now, that is so individualized and so tailored to the moment and to the individual. I don't know if that can be replaced.
You know what? We'll find out. I would suggest that there are lots of different personas that can be successfully copied, if you will. and fundamentally they can be adjusted by age, gender, race, whatever, to maximize the ability to have influence on the person opposite them. And if you look at politicians, if you look at actors, etc., they study this. It's part of their life work. But and I'm not saying that anybody's going to be perfect at any of this, but I suspect that there's a lot more that we could learn in the moment if we were getting significant feedback in real time, and that data and that opportunity technically is really we're right at that moment. I think what you should be doing is seeing if you can get some investor to give you about $30 million to put it together.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do
Okay,
also
David?
have a question lined up from Valerie Williams. So Valerie, please ask your question.
Yes. I'm trying to understand how Chat GPT is different from the ATS, the applicant tracking system. So you're saying that we can use it to actually build our resume, but it can be also used to read the resume by the HR talent associate? Or did I
Yes.
misunderstand that?
George, how would you articulate an answer to that? What's the difference between an ATS and a Chat GPT? So my fast answer to that is an ATS is managed by a human. ATS doesn't do anything. It just sits there with data, and the data has to be manipulated by the human. And what ChatGPT does, what ChatGPT does is it's read all of the data and a lot more. And you're just basically saying, what are the who is the best match for this job? And ChatGPT is basically providing its algorithm, or applying its algorithm to that issue, and coming back and saying these are the most effective candidates for you to
So
look at.
Gerry and Valerie, I suggest you look at a product like Pocket Recruiter. Pocket Recruiter is an AI-based search capability, and what it'll do, it actually reads the job description, then it reads the resume of the prospective candidates. And using AI, it's a little bit more intelligent than just a word search, where let's say the position is for an SAP recruiter, SAP specialist in one of the development of one of the apps on it. It does proximity word searches and can almost pick up like context around the resume of what's being represented. So first it keys in on the keywords, but then it looks at the words around it, and it actually builds a profile of the candidate in relation to what the position is that they're looking to fill. And it has a very high degree of accuracy of being able to say, hey, this person's a business analyst, this person's a developer, and then within the specific applications, what they've been exposed to. So it's gotten that rich in its function and capability where it can go that extra mile in looking at the resumes and comparing it to the job description that's posted and looking to be filled.
The only thing that I would add, Pat, is that every single ATS now has products that a company can pay for that integrate to the ATS to do exactly what Pat is stating. So companies like Beamery, for example, and others are being used by thousands of employers to look into the ATS, to extract information, and to make some helpful determinations in a variety of different ways as to which candidates would be better to pursue. The problem with that is that none of those algorithms are public. And so the ability for any of us to see what are the biases built into those algorithms is just waiting for a great class action suit, in my opinion. But the point is, they're out there, they're being used, but they're not at the level that ChatGPT is today, because they're limited in terms of what they're examining in order to make their determinations. When you're starting to get into massive amounts of data, you're starting to see a whole different approach to this. But a basic ATS that does not have that integrated still requires each of us as recruiters to be able to examine all of the filter based on the fields that exist within the ATS. I don't know if that's helpful, but it's where it's at.
Okay, thank you very much. And a good question as well. And the next raised hand is from George Pace. So George.
So Gerry, I'm going to take. I'm actually going to take two things, Jim. I'm going to bring up a point that you mentioned, and Valerie, I'll kind of tie in the ETS piece to this. This is where the proverbial think differently is going to kick in. If you think, first off, let's talk about what ChatGPT, and actually it's in a space called LLM, which stands for Large Language Model. You know when you type in a sentence in like Gmail and all of a sudden it starts kind of figuring out what you're typing? That's what these models are at a very sophisticated level. They're actually a look ahead. So this idea that they are quote unquote sentient and all knowing and all powerful, they're not. They're just really sophisticated engines. That's number one. So the first question, Valerie, I'll get to you, is that ATS versus ChatGPT. ATS, think of it as a keyword search in a sense. It's trying to say, hey, do you have the right keywords that we hope match up? And that's really all it does. ChatGPT, if you think of it as a small child or a person with a very limited vocabulary in a sense, it knows a lot, but it doesn't know how to do a lot, if that makes sense. It can give the impression that it can do a lot, but there's things like hallucination and a whole bunch of challenges in the model. What I would suggest, this is why I go back to experiencing this. ChatGPT is, and other Bard, Google Bard, and Facebook's Llama, and all the other crap, they're going to ingest in this corpus of data. And they're all going to think differently. They're all going to act differently, just like a person would. What I would suggest to you is that rather than go through what I call the old school of, networking and this, and am I qualified and blah, blah, that's just a resume perspective. Understand these things are ingesting everything. So I'll use myself as an example. If somebody wanted to go out and say, is this person doing YouTube? Is this person blogging? You now have this whole new corpus of data that they can include to say, hey, for this given profile, look at what this individual has done. So it's no longer just the mechanism of the resume. It's going to be the mechanism of your digital footprint. So this is when I tell you to experience this. This is all of this. We're so accustomed to ATS and keyword search and getting the resume aligned. In a sense, that's old school. The new school is going to be, hey, there's this person. Here's all this information. What can I ascertain from them above and beyond what's in the resume? Now, are we there yet? No. Can I see us getting there? Hell yeah. So this is when you look at this ChatGPT, and I've got a slide. I'm not going to share the slide yet because I'm doing this April 20th. Just picture this continuum. You have an individual, you have a coworker, you have a stranger. What are the dynamics of that conversation? And now you talk to three different chat agents, the Google Bard and Chat AI, whatever they are. Every one of them has a different experience. Every one of them has a different expectation of correctness. Everyone has a different expectation of bias. Some of those questions are situational. So understand, we're coming into this world where you're now going to have digital friends. And those digital friends are these chat GPT, large language model things. And how we interact, to Gerry's point, is yet to be determined. But realize they have a lot more data, and they're going to be able to, use this word loosely, reason. That's now going to be part and parcel of this game. How that's going to work, I think we're all still trying to figure it out.
I think one of the things that all of us are amazed at, though, is when you ask a question of these tools, they respond literally instantly and start writing out from a language point of view. You mentioned it, George. From a language point of view, they start speaking back to you. And it's very, even if it's wrong, it sounds so good. It's, they dot every I, they cross every T, they've got all the punctuation in the right place, and it's really instant. I asked my 14-year-old grandson if he understood what this is, and he said, "Oh yeah, I've been using it for the last 3 weeks." And his mother went, "I hope." Well, that started a different conversation, clearly. I talked to one of the English teachers in high school, and she's on a New Jersey council of New Jersey academics and experts looking at how that's going to impact high school education. I'm very active with my college, Stevens Institute of Technology, and they're part of a national effort to figure out how this is going to impact college education. So the issue that we're facing is a very large one. It's not going to happen probably for a couple of years, but it's being experimented with today. And that's going to be important.
Gerry,
Gerry, the
back
word
in the
hallucination.
80s, I worked for Bell Labs, and we had two products within the Unix system. One was called Writer's Workbench, and one was called Documenter's Workbench. And a lot of the things that you see as the underlying functionality right now in the early versions of ChatGPT were resident in those products that many years ago. The difference was the way the functionality and the interface was designed was that, it used independent objective things like the Gady system and, ways of examining sentence structure and things like that and grammar and all. And it would bring them to you as the writer in unison, and you could choose what to apply and what not to apply. And, it was more like guide rails, when you go bowling and you have a little kid and you put up the rails so they just don't throw a gutter ball. The problem is that level of proficiency was in the hands of the creator, and they could choose to what include, what to exclude based upon their knowledge. Unfortunately, a lot of the people are going into ChatGPT for a wide breadth of knowledge and applications, some of which they don't necessarily have the knowledge of. And as the creator, when they're giving the instruction to the machine, they're accepting back almost like the machine is the one that's got the best knowledge and taking whatever it gets back as a response as gospel and going to run with it. So, that's why I look, there's literally hundreds of very niche applications that utilize ChatGPT in a myriad of ways for different specific applications of the technology. And those I see as being much more promising, where when people are just generically going across the functionality in the engine more generically by going into OpenAI or Bard, that's where they're getting into things that they don't necessarily have the subject matter expertise or those guardrails to guide their use of the technology, and they're
We can,
applying it more broadly. And I think that's really where the disconnect happens.
yeah. Let me segue to a couple other things that I think are important. I'd like to get in before, well, we're pretty much at time anyway. But one of them is I've been experimenting in my college, Stevens Institute of Technology, with a new platform called People Grove that is being built for alumni to be able to have conversations with each other. The students coming out of college are all joining into this. So you can imagine that today's young graduates from college are literally working together from the day they graduate. They are on a platform in which they can talk to all their friends or continue to talk to all their friends, no matter where they go, what companies they're involved in. And so there's a much tighter community of people who are graduating from college. And these platforms are getting better and better. We only started this maybe 3 months ago, and we have about 7,000 alumni who are now part of this platform. And over time, I would hope more than half of our 57,000 alumni will probably get involved and be able to join affinity groups, like if they have an IT job or if they were with a certain club or what have you. So they'll be able to engage one another. And these tools are also being used to mentor kids who are still in school. But I do think that they're going to change the game a little bit in what I talked about before from an affinity point of view, being able to engage with a broad group of people that you have something in common with. And when you're looking for a job, be able to better understand from them whether their companies are hiring and whether they would be able to refer you. So if you are not aware of what your college is doing, assuming you went, I would look into it. And I think other kinds of organizations will also be building these platforms as the costs come down. Right now, I think they're costing most colleges around $20,000 to $30,000 a year. And the investment assumes that at some point your donations to the college will be increasing. But I would look into it. People Grove basically is one of maybe 10 platforms out there currently. And People Grove has more than 1,000 university clients. So if you're not aware of some of this, I would look into it. I would call or send an email to the Alumni Association of your college and ask whether they have some kind of platform for alumni to be able to talk to one another. I think it could be an advantage that we're not currently using.
Okay, thank you. And Gerry, we do have 2 more questions queued up. They're in chat,
okay.
so I'm gonna read them, and then for each of the folks who asked this question, if you want to continue or clarify this with Gerry, please unmute and do so. The first I have is from Ronnie, and the question is: do referrals from within a company help beyond getting up to bat? Do they help after the candidate gets through the first or second round?
I can certainly answer that. Probably not. And that's because the sophistication of those programs often lacks the communication capabilities to keep the referrer fully informed of the status of the referee. And so it depends too often on the recruiter or the hiring manager or someone to be aware of and to do that. In the most progressive companies, the answer would be yes, but they would be a handful of companies that fundamentally built in a set of policies and practices about how to keep the link between the referrer and the referee, because obviously if it's successful, you want more referrals from that person. And long term, celebrating, the person who is hired through their onboarding and that kind of thing, as well as being clear to the person who is not hired, who is referred, providing them with sufficient counsel and information that can be helpful to them as they compete for other jobs in other companies. We're not necessarily there yet.
So Ronnie, I hope that was helpful. And if you'd like to continue, otherwise we'll move on.
No, that was very helpful. That exactly answered the question. You also gave a little bit more insight into, I guess, more of the process of how the referral is viewed internally. The fact that there isn't a lot of a way to see from the original referrer what happens is probably part of why it may not continue to help the person who got referred.
Yeah, there's a company, Ernst & Young, for example, when there is a referral, a specific team dedicated only to examining referrals is put on notice, if you will, and they control the communications to that. They also are very proactive in going out to different groups who are diverse and encouraging and supporting referrals from those groups as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And there is also a question from Paula. Gerry, if you had to guess, what percentage of companies do you think may be using an ATS integrated with AI?
By the end of 2023, any company that's hiring more than 1,000 people will believe that they are using an ATS that's higher, that and other tools that are embedded with AI. Under 1,000, the quality of the tools and the cost of those tools is very different. But if you're hiring more than 1,000 people, you've got pretty much the budget to deal with some of that.
Okay, very good. Well, that's all the questions we have queued up. We still have plenty of time if there's another point or two you'd like to discuss.
Sure. I really would like to do something that I always do and talk about candidate experience. I believe that part of your decision as a candidate ought to be that how you're treated as a candidate to some degree aligns to how you're going to be treated as an employee. And you might want to think about that a little bit anyway. There is an effort to collect data on a regular basis from companies that are motivated to improve the candidate's experience as a part of how they manage their employer brand. Because they believe in it, they have a set of values they want to exhibit and live up to. And those companies probably number in the hundreds given that there's millions of companies. So we're not talking about all the companies in the world by any means. But one of the things that you can do is go to a website called the Talent Board. So THE talentboard.org. And there is a free 70-page document each year detailing the results of examining probably 200 to 300 companies' experience with candidates. It's an independent nonprofit that I founded 12 years ago. It raises $1 million each year to do this. The data is highly examined by PhDs, etc. So you can pretty much go to the bank on what candidates in a comprehensive way are saying about specific companies in terms of the experience they had. That data includes or is indexed so that 80% of the people who supply the data were not hired, and only 20% were hired. So there's some interesting ideas there. I could talk about it forever, but the point is, I would go and download that piece of information or that report, and I would go to the end of it, because at the end of it, it will list all of the companies who had the highest response rates, indicating the highest candidate experience. An example of a company that has extraordinary candidate experience is New York Presbyterian Hospital, as an example. The companies that have shit experience will never be acknowledged. So that list, unfortunately, remains quiet. No one knows it, but about 3 people, including me. But the point is, the only way we got them to participate was to promise that if they didn't win and be acknowledged, they would never be acknowledged. So we would not share that information. So that's unfortunate, but it is, because I would have loved to out them all. But the point is, I can't. That was the deal I made to get the quality data that we have. So here's what we've learned, is that about 80% of how you feel about a company that you've applied to can be tracked back to 4 or 5 specific things that the company is doing. And think about this as seatbelt kinds of things, because there are probably some things that each of you have experienced that you love about that company, even if you didn't get the job. But there are 4 or 5 critical pieces to that. One is whether or not the company has demonstrated that they've actually listened to you. And typically that's a company that is in some way, shape, or form at some part of the journey that you're on has kind of told you, oh, so this is what you've told me about yourself, or this is what you think is the most important thing in terms of competing for this job, or I hear you went to this school. We asked, for candidates who have this kind of degree or whatever, and you have it. So in some way, shape, or form are demonstrating at some point that you've listened. Another thing that you do not know is whether or not the recruiters are held accountable for candidate experience. But you can suspect it if at some point they're asking you about your experience, regardless of whether you're going forward or not. So you can suspect that. But companies that essentially say your performance is based not only on putting a body in a seat, but how you treated the people that you put in that seat, as well as those who didn't get to go in that seat. And so the only way you'd know that and be able to include that is if you measured it. Perception of fairness is a tough one. But that is also an area. And one of the ways we get at perception of fairness is asking candidates whether or not they were able to share all of the things about themselves that they felt were important in competing for the job. And a number of the most progressive companies in candidate experience will ask on the application as the last question, were you able to, was this application sufficient for you to tell us all that you think is important for us to know about you in competing for this job? And if not, here's a space to add to that. And then if you were screened by over the phone, for example, a similar question would be asked at the end of that interview. And if you went in for interviews, you would hear the same thing at the end of that interview, etc. So we know that doing that, corporations increase the perception on the part of candidates that they have done all they can to ensure a fair treatment, if you will, in the interview process, because not everybody is that well trained. They didn't have Alex as a coach, so fundamentally getting at those who may be less capable of saying all they want, because you're all smiling, but all of us the day after wish we had said something. We all do. It's just inevitable. Setting expectations is two others. Setting expectations is a very key issue in everything from how long this application is to whether or not I've got another 6 interviews or whether this is going to be a panel interview or any number of different kinds of things at each stage of the process of the interview. So those expectations not only need to be set, but they need to be kept. We know that if you do not know how long it takes for a company to fill a job, your expectation of how long it's going to take for that company to get back to you to tell you whether we're going forward or not is usually not the same as the company's. And so it's important that these things be there. And the last, and probably the most important, and the one that every company should be doing is full closure. If I'm going forward with you, you're going to get a note that says, hey, let's go forward. Like your resume and like your application, and we want to do something here. But how many times have we all not heard from a company ever? And each of those things has an impact on you in terms of your perception of that company, and your, paranoia, if you will, as to why the company is operating this way in terms of fairness and in terms of other kinds of issues. So we know that those 5 things are critical, and we can see in a kind of a net promoter score approach, the 40 or 50 companies that apply each year who get very positive net promoter scores as a result of that. And in my opinion, if you looked at those companies, you'll see that a number of them operate in this area or hire people remotely who live in this area. And I would pay attention to the opportunities that they have because you'll get better treatment.
There is one follow-up question from Valerie. Do you have to enter your employer name even if this is for your own personal use?
You mean your current employer name?
And Valerie, if you'd like to clarify, just quickly unmute. Yep.
Yes, I went to the talent board and I wanted to see if I could download the report while you were speaking. And they're asking to pre-register for the next report for 2022. And they're asking for your company name, your email, and your job title. So I don't necessarily want company to know that I'm looking at this. But is that required or can you?
It
Just trying
shouldn't
to figure
be,
out
but
how
it
much.
is. The purpose really is if you are a recruiter. I would tell you that if you do it, it'll never see the light of day, but you'd have to believe me then, because I know I'm on the board. So full disclosure, I did found this company. I am on the board of the company. The president of the company, Kevin Grossman, is the one who probably made the decision to require that. And the reason is because he wants to not sell because we don't charge, but he wants to tell someone who is a recruiter or a recruiting leader that they should participate in this year's Candidate Experience Awards. He is not really going to ever respond to you, I can assure you. And I would beat him upside the head if in fact he did. But he is, if your title or your company is not something, typically your title in a company does not reflect recruiting or human resources. So the answer is yes. It's probably required. And if that's a real concern of you, send me an email separately and I will download a copy and send it to you.
Gerry, would it be okay in that case for someone to say that they're a consultant? So like Valerie can say, my company is VSW Consulting, for her initials.
I mean, I'd make it all up, but I mean, it's up to you. I'm not trying to. I'll deal with whatever value system you're operating on. So if you just need a clean copy that never, you never had to deal with anything, that's fine. I'll send it to you. Send me a note, and I'll take care of it.
Thank you.
Otherwise, work around it.
And I realize, I'm sorry, Valerie, I missed an earlier question, but I see it here now. Can you talk about pay transparency?
Oh, I'm sorry. I really wanted to talk about pay transparency. Yeah. So this is probably the one thing that keeps up talent acquisition leaders. Recruiters, they do what they're told in relation to it. And years ago, not that many years ago, recruiters were trained not to tell you what the job is worth because they didn't want you to bow out too soon or get too excited or whatever about pay until they dealt with all the other reasons, motivations that you should have for the job. Thinking that, people will take a lower priced job just because we've turned you on to the challenge of it or some other bullshit. So there were problems with that. It impacted gender disparity in a very large way, racial disparity in terms of pay for the same job. over a number of years, and it became an institutional kind of issue. And only about 12 years ago was there sufficient effort to try to deal with equity around pay, even though the first pay equity law was in 1963. Just saying that this country basically said by law, for equal work, equal pay. And I will tell you that that seems like such an obvious thing for us, but in 1942, when men went to war, women legally received 1/2 of the pay of the men they replaced by law. I thought, wow, isn't that cool? Anyhow, that has to do with the history of recruiting. Anyhow, the where we are today is that 49 out of 50 states, 49 out of 50 states have equal pay laws. Many of them very bad. A few of them quite amazing. New York, California, Washington, a couple others, Colorado. However, the one that isn't is Mississippi. Just I've asked this question a few times, and most people get close. Mississippi has no equal pay law. However, in Europe, there's a movement that's reflected in some of the latest laws in the last 2 or 3 years around pay transparency. So it's not just a requirement for equal pay, it's a requirement that you be transparent about the pay that you are giving to everyone. So in California, as of now, you not only have to publish the pay in the job postings, but you have to share with the California government the pay for every job or job family, broken down by age, race, and gender. And what do you think California is going to do with that data? They're going to publish it. So if you're an employee in a company and working in California, you would be able to access how disparate your pay is versus anyone else in terms of those groups. I think it's going to be fascinating. That's good. That is just creating all kinds of interesting conundrums for companies that haven't done their calculations, or argue that the calculation that they're required to give is wrong and that there's different ways to do that, or just want to work around. And in Europe, we're about to see a pay transparency directive that will take this to a new level. And many of the large companies in the United States are active in Europe. And so they're going to have to deal with not only sharing publicly with you at the beginning of your interest in them, what kinds of pay discrepancies currently exist, but also what they're doing about it. And the penalties for doing nothing are going to be significant, to the point where in Europe, the company can be shut down. Whereas in the United States, we have minimal penalties for most of these kinds of things, with the exception of California, etc. And so that's why recruiters in almost every company have been trained not to ask you what your salary is. and to share with you, if you request it, especially if you request it, what the average salary would be for someone who is hired for this job. And it will be unacceptable by law to say, oh, it could be between 25,000 and 250,000. That will be bullshit. We know it's bullshit. So it will be illegal to do that, and already is in several states. On the other hand, there are companies that are doing that. There are companies that are excluding from consideration anyone who works in a state that requires that pay be in a job posting. So there are companies that at the bottom of their job posting, it says, this job is available to anyone in every state in the United States except Colorado, Washington, California, New York. Because their lawyers told them it's okay to discriminate against people by the state that they live in, which again is bullshit. But we are in an era in which we have to come to grips with this. We have to deal with the spirit of this is about. We have to deal with fixing it, which is costly. And there's a lot of nuances here. So for example, if pay is increasing rapidly in terms of what it takes for me to hire someone, then the person who's in the company is likely to discover that the person who has no experience with this job in the company is getting more money than I, who've been here for 3 years. Which, and then the company is going, but if I were to upgrade all of my, workers in that job, it would cost me X, and I don't have that. I don't have X right now, or at least they don't think they do. So there's a lot of issues here, and there is an awful lot of social change that's going on. And the folks that are passing the laws aren't necessarily asking me or you or anyone. They're just passing laws that they think might make sense. But corporations have to figure out how do they comply. And that's what's going on right now. So there's a lot of conversation about the compliance issue, about what do we tell our employees that we're doing, or how do we handle employees who come to us and say, this compression issue has impacted me. I haven't had an increase in 3 years, and you're now paying people $4,000 more than I make to come in to do the same job that I'm doing. So I'm not saying we shouldn't solve all these problems. We should. I'm just saying we're in the midst of trying to solve those problems. It's keeping talent acquisition leaders up at night because more people are turning them down. More people are asking questions that they aren't prepared to answer or don't even know the answers to them. And I think it's exciting, in my opinion, because I think we should keep the pressure on. If I were looking for a job, it would be, if it's not in the job posting, it's the first damn question I'm going to ask. And fundamentally, I think more and more recruiters are being trained to give you better answers. And for example, they might say, look, the range for people who are hired into this job is $75,000 to $110,000. 90% of all the people who are hired, however, 90% are hired in the first quartile of that range. And so you can expect this to this would be your offer. And the differences have to do with your background and experience, the number of years you've had, and, et cetera, the kind of projects you've worked on in the past or something like that. So there would be more information to you about the variability of how that offer would take place. Now, is that done the same way at the C level? So, we're talking about, people at the board level? No. At the board level, it's a huge shift and variation at that level. And at the lowest level, hourly work, yeah, you know exactly what that is. There is no variation either. You're either getting $12.50 or you're getting $15 or whatever it might be within that given company and state law. But fundamentally, you see that change, and then somewhere in where we all are or fall, hopefully we're getting to a point where you're getting more information so you can make a better decision whether this is a company to go forward with. Hopefully that's helpful, Marilyn.
And Gerry, we
This
have
is
still a
Paula.
couple. 1 second, Paula. Excuse me, please.
Okay.
We do have a couple of questions queued up. They've been waiting for a while. One is from Alex, and we'll get to yours, Paula, as long as we don't run out of time.
I had my
Gerry,
hand raised.
is there
That's okay.
any attempt in America to A, identify, or B, eliminate toxic bosses? There are too many out there, and they are they're detrimental to the organization and employees.
The answer is only a handful of companies. When I worked for Johnson & Johnson in the dinosaur era, twice I went to the hiring manager's boss and basically told him that my recruiting operation would no longer service their operation because I had data showing they were abusive as managers. And in each case, the person said some very bad words and that they were going to get me fired. And I gave them my boss's phone number, who basically said, "Oh, you must have been talking to Gerry." And then basically said, "Well, tomorrow the head of development and learning will show up at your office, and once you and your managers have been retrained, I'm sure Gerry will be willing to come back and help you hire people." So I knew that I had my boss's back, and if I didn't give a shit. But keep in mind, I haven't worked for a large company in 30 some odd years. So there's that as well. I know of a company, DaVita is the company, in which the hiring managers are trained to interview and hire and manage. When they interview, it's a panel interview, and one of the panelists is an IO psychologist who does not pay attention to the candidate, but watches to see whether the hiring manager, in fact, behaves in the way that he or she was trained. And this is over a 6-month period in which the hiring manager must interview as part of a panel every month. And at the end of 6 months, if they devolve or go back to their old ways, they are no longer allowed to hire, in which case they often turn over or they have to go through retraining. Now, I love that stuff, but that's like notable, right? As that's not where most companies are. Most companies do not actually assess a manager's management skill. They assess their accomplishments. They don't ask how many people they burned out to get them. So the answer is pretty clear. We need to integrate, if you will, talent management and talent acquisition so that we have a better understanding of that. I will tell you that a very mature experienced recruiter who is world class, who loves his or her job, cares about all of the people that they engage, and that's not everybody, will likely tell you somewhere in the interview process that this is a problem hiring manager that you're going to be working for, and are you prepared to manage him or her as part of your decision. But that's unusual.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thank you, Gerry. We have 2 more questions in the hopper, and we're going to focus on, I think these should be the last 2, just given our time frame, if that's okay. So it's 2 hands that are raised. So the first one, Jim Monahan raised his hand. So if you want to quickly unmute.
Yes. You were talking about pay transparency. I used to work for the Rutgers University Foundation, and all their salaries are published. And the one thing I found was that the primary source of gossip and gripe sessions was, can you believe so-and-so's making this? They barely do anything, and they don't know anything. And boy, I'd like to be making that much money. So that was one observation. I'm not sure I'd want everyone at my company knowing what I'm making, but just an observation.
It's a good observation, and the problem with transparency is exactly that we have to learn how to manage and or adjust as a result of knowing that the perception of their peers and colleagues is that they don't deserve the money that they're getting.
Right.
But it's still better, in my opinion, than not knowing how much money they get. So, for example, in my professional association, which is the Society for Human Resource Management, the head of or the president of that 501c nonprofit managed to stack the deck for his board so that they went from something under $1 million to where he now makes more than $3.5 million a year on the backs of the people who are members of the association, which pisses me off. So I'm a loud proponent of transparency and the fact that, it's not going to be a rumor with me. It's going to be pretty out in front. And when, somebody in a public company is making 700 times what you're making, Jim, you should know about it, because it's not probably a servant leader that you're working for.
Yeah. Thank you.
And also, thank you. And also, Paula has a question. Her hand is raised. So, Paula,
Yes.
Please unmute.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to apologize for earlier. I do respect the rules because it's needed to keep an orderly meeting. I was just having microphone problems, and I now have switched over to my phone. I wanted to also stay on the transparency point. I recently ran into one of those job descriptions where they stated that if you reside, not just wanted to work, but if you resided in a particular state, specifically New York, and 3 others, you could email them and they would tell you what the range was. That's how they played the game. So I figured, it's a factual question, right? And I don't have to be a New York resident. I just simply, and I didn't misrepresent, I sent them an email and said, what is the range for people who live in New York? And they did not answer it until after a week or a week and a half later. I just went ahead and applied. And then miraculously, within 24 hours, I got the information of the range. Curiously, though, when filling out the application itself, they had the nerve enough to ask me what salary I was looking for, and had all of these different slots. Like they didn't even leave it blank. You had to choose. So I just wanted to share that as an experience, because this was a New Jersey company that's visible on Route 1 near Princeton.
Yeah, well, that's illegal.
Well,
They just don't
Gerry,
know.
I think it's a workaround. I'm sure there's a very, very technical workaround.
No,
That they're like,
not for
yeah,
New Jersey. Not for New Jersey.
no.
They cannot ask your salary. Not until
No.
they
They
supply
asked
the
what was
information.
my desired. They wanted to know my desired salary.
That is the workaround.
Yeah.
That is the workaround. They're not asking your salary. They're asking what you want to get paid. And in my opinion, and the data that I have suggests that it's the second from the worst question that can be asked. The worst is, what is your salary? The second worst is, what do you think what do you think you're worth? Is the other, as opposed to, here's what we pay.
That's right. I agree with you. I also concur, without repeating your comments with regard to pay transparency. And I think that piggybacks into something George was saying earlier. We're going to have to change, at least I feel I have to change my approach of how I make everything known about how I'm adding value, documenting. Since you've got computers now that are scrubbing to look for actual proof of activity.
Right.
That's all I wanted to say. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the other issue that you're all going to have to face into is that some of these algorithms are probably going to show poorer success in the past because of biases for people with more experience than required, which gets us into a subtle approach to ageism that we all have to deal with. And fundamentally, I don't have solutions to that. There are some things that you can work around and game, but the fact of the matter is, ageism is one of those basically embedded pieces that exist in an awful lot of companies.
Yep, thank you very much. And just so we're clear on the salary request discussion in New Jersey, they cannot ask you for your salary or salary history, but like you said, they can ask what you're looking for. The exception to that, at least in New Jersey, once they make you the offer, they can ask you your salary history for the companies they're going to use for or validation.
Sure. Yeah, it's part of background check.
Background check, yep. So, all right. This was a terrific discussion, Gerry. So many people were engaged, and you not only have a gift for providing wonderful information as this was, but getting people engaged and keeping this a discussion and not just a presentation. And so this was just delightful for me, and I'm so appreciative on behalf of the Breakfast Club that you were able to participate. And before people put their hands up, I'm putting my little clapping the hands icon just to let you know.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
And folks, just before we wrap up, a couple of things. One is we'll keep this session open a few more minutes for virtual networking. If you'd like to hang around, you're welcome to do so. And we invite any and all of you to do that if you want. And also, I want to let you know next month we will be right back here. Breakfast Club of New Jersey remains virtual to anyone who wishes to join. May 13th is going to be the second Saturday of May. Ken Scher, career coach Ken Scher, will be here to survive and thrive after a job loss. So that will be a spectacular program, I'm sure. Ken's always good fun. So hopefully we will see you then. Looks like the sun's coming out here. Hopefully in Huntington it is as well. Actually, I'm heading out to the South Shore of Long Island today, Gerry, so I'll wave. And
Cool.
maybe, very good. But folks,
Thank you for having me. Be good.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you again for being such a presenter and supporter for us as well. So, folks, do have a good holiday weekend if you are appropriately sharing. Of course, it is Easter tomorrow. That's still Passover. It's still Ramadan. So if you're celebrating, hopefully that'll be a joyous occasion for you. Until we get to see you all then next month, we'll simply say goodbye.